Well, hello everybody. It's David Tucker, and this is time for another episode of Cloud Builder Live. Now, I hope you've been hanging with us for the last few episodes. We've been in GCP, we've been in Azure, but we're actually going to go back tonight to where it started, and we're going to be focused on working within AWS. And I think we've got some amazing things that we're going to dive into, and we're going to look at some things that just recently went generally available. So I'm really excited to share with you those things that we're going to be diving into. However, if it is your first time joining us, I just want to let you know really quick that kind of the purpose of what we're doing here is to really teach you here about how to truly use cloud solutions, right? A lot of people go through and they'll learn about certifications and those kind of things, but what we're actually about here is truly building something, which usually means you have to piece together multiple services. Now, with that being said, tonight we're going to be looking at a bunch of things. We're going to be looking at the Serverless Application Model, or SAM. We're going to be looking at leveraging step functions. We're going to be looking at using that with some services, Lambda, S3, Textract. It's going to be great. Like, I'm really excited about showing this to all of you. So let me go ahead, though, and give you a tiny bit of background information. I want to give you kind of just ease your conscience here for a minute. I'm not going to spend a ton of time before we dive in and start building, but I do want to help you understand why what I'm going to be sharing is actually pretty important. So we're going to go back in time here for just a little bit. So when we look at serverless, just this concept about running things without having to manage the underlying infrastructure, it's changed dramatically since it first was launched. If we really consider the time when we actually heard at reInvent back in 2014, the announcement that Lambda was launched. So we've seen a ton of shifts. But even then, we had a service called CloudFormation, and it enabled us to be able to write infrastructure as code, and we could do that with our new Lambda functions as well. However, it was hard and it was painful in the beginning. So what happened is that over time, we started to get some new ways to do this, right? One thing that launched was the serverless framework, or serverless.com, and pretty quickly after that, we saw that, I think AWS realized that, hey, we can do more to make this experience easier for developers. And so we had the Serverless Application Model, or SAM, launch. And then recently, or at least a lot closer to now than when SAM launched, we had the CDK. And we've already covered the CDK in a couple of different episodes here on Cloud Builder Live. Now, with this being said, what we actually get from here is a tool that really enables us to make it easier to build serverless applications. Now, behind the scenes, what this still does ultimately is it still uses CloudFormation, but it makes it easier for us to write these templates. We're going to be writing them in YAML, and then it converts them into full definitions in CloudFormation, and then we use CloudFormation just like we had written the templates there. So it is a way to make things easier so that there's not so much boilerplate when you're configuring things like Lambda functions, step functions and the like, and we're going to be giving some examples of those on this very episode. So that's what I'm excited to share with you. But here's the thing I also want to talk to you about. One of the shifts that happened when we started to create these serverless applications, because really before Lambda, we were just spinning up virtual machines for everything in a lot of ways. Now, there were some services that made that easier, but what we started to see was these services that we're using, things like, Lambda as our compute and DynamoDB, and maybe we're using things like, simple queue service or simple notification service, for example, these are not just little individual services that we're using here and there. These are a core part of the architecture for the solutions that we're building. So what happened was when we started with serverless, we really started with us trying to emulate the cloud locally. We would try to create these complete dev environments locally. And with that, we would try to run, tests, and we would want to run integration, and those kind of things would actually happen locally on our machine, emulating the cloud. Well, over time, we began to realize that's not really feasible when we have so many different services that we're leveraging. And then we moved to more of a hybrid model where some things were local, some things were in the cloud. But now we're really starting to see that we're entering in the time when all of our development experience happens in the cloud. We're even seeing that a lot of our development environments are shifting into the cloud. And that's why I'm excited to kind of share with you the other piece of what we're going to be talking about tonight, which is the Serverless Application Model, or SAM, Accelerate. So here, SAM Accelerate gives us the ability to optimize that cloud-first development experience. So it really gives us an optimized way so that we can deploy code changes for some services, as well as getting access to logs and tracing of our cloud workloads. So this is what we're going to be leveraging, and this is what recently became generally available just at the end of last month. So again, just mere weeks ago, and we're going to be covering it tonight, and you're going to have the tools that you'll be able to walk away from here and be able to actually go through and work on these things yourself. So that's kind of where we're at. Now, as we get ready to dive into this, I'm curious if you just want to post in the comments, like if any of you have worked with SAM yet, or if this is the first time you're encountering it. So just take a few seconds here, write down in the comments, hey, I'm brand new to SAM, or hey, I've used SAM in a few projects, and that's going to help me know kind of where to focus and where to dive in over the course of this episode. Okay, so now that's kind of been the preamble to kind of get things ready. Let's talk about what you're going to need if you want to follow along with what we're doing, or if you want to go back and watch this after the fact and follow along. So what do you need? Well, a couple things that are important. First is you will need an AWS account. Now, this can be a sandbox account if you have access to one of those, or you can actually use, if you just have your own account that you've configured with your own card and all of that, you can use that. So in addition, you also will need to have access to the AWS CLI. So with that being said, this is actually a prerequisite for installing the SAM CLI. So that's what you're going to need to have installed. Also, just for my example, you don't need this for SAM, but I'm going to be using Node.js here. This just gives us kind of a language to deal with, but we're not spending a ton of time in JavaScript. So with that being said, if you're really diving in and you're trying to, you're wanting to apply SAM, but you're wanting to use Python, or you're wanting to use .NET, or, whatever the case, you can take the concepts that I'm going to be covering and you can apply them to any language that you want to work with. And just from reading through the comments, it looks like most people are pretty new or maybe brand new to SAM, which is great. I'm excited that you're here. You'll get to see some of the power and capabilities that we have with it, especially now that we have access to SAM Accelerate. So with this being said, the first thing I want to call out here is let me pull up here in my browser. I want to call out that there is a link that we're going to be posting that's going to let you know how you can install the SAM CLI. So here's what this page will look like when you get there, and you'll be able to just select, again, whether you're going to be on Linux, Windows, or Mac, and you can get the proper instructions for being able to install SAM on whatever platform that you're actually working in. Now, I'm on Mac, so I've already followed these steps, and I'll show you how you can actually verify that in just a minute once we get into working within the terminal. So if you've done these things, if you have your AWS account, or at least one that you can use, if you have the AWS CLI installed, if you have Node.js, and if you have the SAM CLI installed following the instructions that I just showed you, you'll be able to actually jump in and follow along. But again, if you're right here and you say, oh no, I don't have those things, don't worry, you can follow the links that we've provided. And with that being said, you can go through and get these things ready, and then go back and watch the video again, follow along, and I'll also give you a hint. We're going to be giving you access to a GitHub repository that has the links you'll need, has all the code I'm going to be covering tonight, so don't feel like you have to feverishly try to get this done while I'm talking. Okay. So that gets us through really all of the prerequisites, and we're going to get to the point now where we're ready to start building some stuff. So what I'm going to do here, I'm going to go ahead and pull up my terminal. And let me go ahead and move this so you guys can take a look at this as well. So I have my terminal here, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and just verify that I have SAM installed. So I'm just going to do SAM -- version. And when I do that, I'm going to see that I'm using version 1.53. That actually is the current version, unless they've updated it maybe in the last half day. So it's really close to the absolute latest version if it isn't the latest version. Now, the next thing I'm going to do here is we're going to use one of the commands that comes with the Serverless Application Model, and we're going to use the init command to help create a new project. So what I'm going to do, I'll type in sam init, and it's going to ask me for some different options here. Now, we've got the ability to say whether or not we want to start from one of the templates that AWS provides, or if we want to go in and use a custom template. So here, I'm going to say that I want to start off with one of the AWS examples. Now, we're going to be going through and modifying this heavily, like really heavily. But this is going to give us a good starting point. And again, if you're getting ready to do your first SAM application or your first time working with step functions, I recommend going this way because they're also going to give you a structure that follows best practices for how you can build serverless applications on SAM. So we'll hit quick start template. What I'm going to do next is I'm going to select that I want to do a multi-step workflow. And I see here there is a question about using A Cloud Guru AWS sandboxes. Yes, I don't think there should be any problem with doing that to follow along. You'll just need to go through the proper steps to configure that to work with the CLI. So cool. So with that being said, I'm going to select the multi-step workflow option here. So that's going to be number 2. And this will then ask, okay, now what do you want to use for the runtime? And again, like I said, you can use any of the ones listed here. Now, you also can use a lot more than this, but it would take some more heavy lifting on your end to make this work. In my case, I'm going to choose number 7 because I want to use the latest Node.js version that is supported on Lambda, which is going to be 16. So I'll hit 7. And then it's going to say, do I want to enable X-ray tracing on the functions in my application? Now, you might come into this and say, I have no idea what that is. Don't worry, we'll cover that later. I'm just going to say yes right now, and then I will hit enter. Now, it's going to ask here for a name. And in this case, I'm going to give this the name of CBL Workflow. So let me go ahead and just say CBL Workflow. And next, it's going to ask me one other question. Oh, no, it doesn't ask another question. That was the it. Perfect. So now we need to go into that directory, which is going to be CBL Workflow. And now we're going to open this up in VS Code. So I can do that by just saying code and then dot to give it the current directory. So this will open up. Now give me just a minute here. I'm going to position this first, and then I'm going to zoom in because I realize nobody will be able to see it as tiny as it is. So let me go ahead and bring this up to where you can take a look at it. And I want to quickly just review what we have here. The first thing I want you to notice is, and one thing that is common with all SAM applications, is we have this YAML file that's going to be our infrastructure definition. So here, this is generally called template.yaml. And so I'm going to open this up, and you're going to see that we have a lot of things included here just out of the box because we used one of the AWS quick start templates. So here, if I go in, for example, I can see that we have, first of all, we're telling it what template format version we're using. But I'm going to go in, we have some globals defined. We have different resources. These are the actual cloud resources, so the AWS resources we're creating. We have a state machine, which is another way of referring to a step function. We have a lot of properties on that. We also have some Lambda functions, which are denoted here by AWS Serverless Function. And those have properties. And then we have a simple table, which this is a SAM construct for creating a DynamoDB table without having to know all of the individual properties to define. So all of that is great. Now, one of the things that we'll notice here is that we're actually defining our step function here in a separate file, which is a stocktrader.asl.json file, which we can see here if we go under state machine and click on this file, we get this definition. Now, let's talk for just a quick minute. If you're brand new to step functions enable you to go in and create multi-step workflows that are managed by a service within AWS. So let's say, for example, you wanted to build something that processed pictures. So if you wanted to upload a picture into a bucket, and then once it's there, you wanted to have that trigger a workflow that created a thumbnail that got all the metadata out of the image, and then maybe simultaneously it went through and submitted that image over to the computer vision service on AWS called Recognition, and it got tags out for that image. And then after all of those steps had completed, if nothing had failed, then you want to go in and insert that data into a database, and then maybe after that you want to put it into OpenSearch. Just an example of some of the types of workflows you can build. It handles things like managing the data that gets passed from one step to another. It also handles the workflow. So if you want it to manage a sequential set of tasks, if you want it to go through and do some things in parallel, if you want to have certain things happen when there are errors on any of those individual steps, that's just the kind of thing you can do with this service called Step Functions. And when Step Functions launched, it supported a handful of services, but now it has integration through the AWS SDK with most AWS services and the different actions you can perform on those services. So it is a very powerful service, and I can tell you that I've worked with my clients and I've got a ton of these that are in production, right, that people are using on a daily basis. So this is a production quality service. Now there's different variations of Step Functions depending on your use case. We'll talk about that a little bit, but this is what we're talking about in this example, and we'll be building one out today. So here we have our sample definition. Now you might look at this and say, wow, that's just something else I have to learn how to use. I've got to figure out how all of this works, and I'm brand new to this concept. And I totally get that. I get that there can be a little bit of apprehension or frustration about this. So with this being said, I want to make this easy for you. So in a minute, we're going to show you how to use a tool that AWS has provided so that you don't have to, the first time you're trying to work with Step Functions, you don't have to go in and understand how to use what we call Amazon States Language, or ASL, to define your Step Functions. And it's actually a very powerful tool that exists in the browser. So we'll get to that in just a minute. But the first thing I want to do is I want to go to this template.yaml file. And I want to go through here, and I'm going to basically wipe out most of what's in here. So we're going to keep this output section, but we're not going to have anything in it yet. I'm going to go here under all these resources that have been defined. I'm just going to delete them. And I'm going to go through, we can leave globals for the moment, but I think I'm actually going to update that as well. So let me go ahead here. I'm going to go ahead and highlight this global section, and I'm going to update it here to just use a runtime. Now, the reason I'm doing this is because when I define something here for global under functions, that means every time I define a serverless function, I don't have to enter this value in. It's just going to apply it to all of them kind of by default. So I've added that in, and I want to go ahead and add in just a few basic resources. So here I'm going to go in and add in first an S3 bucket. Now, if you're not even familiar with S3, this is the AWS storage service. It stands for Simple Storage Service. There's 3 S's, hence S3. And this service just enables you to store data of whatever type you want. Now, what we want to do is we want to have this bucket configured in such a way that we can drop in a PDF file, and then that will trigger our step function to execute. So a few things here. First, I've just defined the bucket. Here it's called document bucket. Now, the next thing that you'll notice here, and I need to change my indent level here. The next thing that you'll notice is that it also has a configuration on it. So here I have something called a notification configuration. Basically what this is saying is it wants a service called EventBridge to get notifications whenever something changes in this bucket. So one of the things that's really powerful with serverless applications and step functions is that they're event driven. That means we can say when one action is taken, we want something else to happen. So in this case, we're saying when we upload a new PDF file, we want it to kick off this step function that we're going to be building. So that's why we've enabled that there. The next thing that I want you to note here is that we are defining here a simple table. That's going to be a table in DynamoDB, and we're just saying that it's going to have a document ID as its primary key. Now, I'm not going to dive in a huge amount to working with DynamoDB. That's a whole separate discussion, but I want to show you here how to actually leverage this within a SAM application. Okay, now the next thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to add in some outputs. So here, these outputs are just things that we want to be able to reference. So in this case, I want the name of the bucket that it creates and the name of that DynamoDB table, which will be our database we'll be using. I want it to output both of those when it deploys. So you'll get to see those when we deploy here in just a minute. Okay, so this is all we're going to do for now. So I'm going to go ahead and save this. Now, I could go ahead and deploy it. I'm not going to yet because I want us to bounce over to the browser really quick, and I want us to go take a look at the new capabilities that we have for actually defining step functions. So I'm going to go ahead here in the console, And I'm logging in under an AWS account that I have, and I'm going to click here on the options for step functions. Now, I should notice here, or I should let you know here, that we're going to be in US East 2 for most of this. That's just the region I've chosen to use. You can use whatever region you so desire for yours, but there might be a few places you'll need to update some of the commands so that you're working within the proper region. I'm going to click here under the option here on the left nav that says State Machines. And we're going to see here that we currently don't have any state machines defined. That's what we're going to be working on. So I want to go here to the option where it says Create State Machine. Now, we're not going to be actually creating our step function or state machine in the browser, but we're going to use the browser to help us generate that JSON file that creates the definition for our step function. It's just a much easier way to go about it and to do it. So with this being said, here's what you need to know. So I'm going to go back here. I'm going to choose the option that says that we want to design our workflow visually, because that, as I mentioned, that's what we want to do. The next thing I want to say is we want to use a standard type. Now, they actually have provided a resource for you here that will be helpful in understanding which one you should select. If you're looking at things that are going to be, short execution with a large amount of executions, that's going to lean more towards Express. We're using standard, which makes more sense for the kind of workflow that we're doing. It also gives us some extra capabilities. But again, it's going to be based on what you need to do. So here, I'm going to choose this, and then we will hit next. Okay, now we get to start building out our workflow. Now, I'm going to try to get this to where it'll all fit in on the screen. It's a little bit challenging, but I think we're going to be able to make it work here. So let me go ahead here, and the first thing I want to do is I want to go in and we're just going to enter in a nice little comment about our state machine here. And we're going to say that this is going to process documents that are uploaded into that bucket, as I mentioned. That's the first thing we're going to do. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to drag out a step here in our workflow. And this step is going to be to invoke a Lambda function. So here, we're going to call this one, instead of just Lambda invoke, we're going to have several Lambda functions, so we need to give it a name. We're going to have this one be get document metadata. Now, this is going to go through and analyze the PDF file that we upload, and it's going to just get some of that metadata that's baked into a PDF, like how many pages is it, who's the author, when was it created, those kind of things, and it's going to get that information for us. That'll be the first step in our workflow. So we have that. What we need to do from here is I'm going to go here under these tabs. I'm going to change some settings. The first setting that I'm going to change is I'm going to go here to output, and I am going to deselect the option that says filter output. So I'm trying to actually make this a bit easier. One of the things that can get a little confusing when you're working within step functions is managing the data that goes into and out of each individual step. It uses something called JSON path expressions, and there's a ton of different customization points to control what goes into and what comes out of a given step. Now, AWS has also created a tool that helps with this. I'll show you that in just a minute, but basically there's a way you can simulate this and make sure that you have the right settings for your workflow. But for our case, I'm just going to keep it really basic, and that's why I've deselected this option to filter output. I just want it to pass everything that I output from a step to the next step. So that's one thing. The next thing I'm going to do here is I'm also going to remove the retry. This is one of the powerful features that you get with step functions, is you can actually configure all of these settings for when to retry if it fails. So for example, we could have it have a 2-second interval before the first retry. We can set a max number of attempts. We can even have a back off rate, right? In other words, it will wait even longer each time there's a failure before it starts up again. This is a very powerful feature, but we're not going to use this in our sample workflow today. So I'm going to go ahead and remove that for this step. So that's our first step. Now, here's the next thing, and here's what I want to show you that this isn't just for working with Lambda functions. AWS has a service called Textract. Now, Textract is one of the AI services from AWS. What this means is these are just pre-trained models for working within AWS, for doing AI within AWS. So in this case, we're going to use the capability that lets it pull text out of a document, which is pretty cool. We don't have to spin up our own model or do any of that, manage any of the infrastructure. We're just going to leverage this service. So I want to show you here how you can use another service within a step function. So I'm going to type Textract, and there's an option here that says Start Document Text Detection. So I'm just going to drag that out. And this is going to start the process of pulling out the data from that PDF file that we've uploaded. So great, we've got this in here. Now what I need to do from here is I need to set some data because it needs to know where this specific document is going to be. Now, if you remember from the very beginning, I said we're kicking this off by uploading a file into S3. And here's the cool thing. If we can just tell this service where that file is, it can go grab it and it can do that detection for us, but it needs to know where to find it. So here's what I'm going to do. And this will help you see what I mean about the data going into and out of each step. So I'm going to go here where it says parameters, and I'm going to paste in a value. Now, this value that I'm going to paste in is what it's going to define where that object is. So in this case, we're going to say it's an S3 object, and we're going to say that it needs a bucket and a name. And we're going to use this syntax. Basically what we're saying is by putting a $$ at the end of these values is that it's going to get the information from the previous step. So here we're going to have it pass in the bucket and key, which we're actually putting in place in that Lambda function. Great. So that's this step. Now what we need to do here is I'm also going to do another little bit of adjusting. I'm going to go in here and we're going to say that we want to add the original input to the output. So in other words, not only do we want to pass the output of this, we also want it to pass everything that it received when it started. So to do this, we can go in and use a JSON path expression here, and we're going to say that we want the output from this to go into something called text detection. You'll see where that is in just a minute. So great, we've done that. What we're going to do next is we're going to go through and drag out another step. Here we get to see some of the flow steps that exist within step functions. Here we want to pass in one that's just wait. So the reason we're doing this, and I'm going to set this to be 30 seconds, is when we call start document text detection, that's actually just kicking off a process. It's not going to be done. This isn't what we would call synchronous. This is asynchronous. So that means we need to wait for it to complete the process of getting that text out. But we can't guarantee that that's only going to be 30 seconds. So I'm going to show you how we'll utilize some of the other flow capabilities so that we can make sure that we know when it is done. So we've dragged out the wait step. So that's there. We've set the number of seconds on that step to 30. I'm going to bring out another Lambda function. So I'm going to go ahead and take this Lambda function and I'm going to put it right below our wait step. Now, what I need to do here is I need to give this one a name as well. And so we're going to call this one get text detection results. Now, we're not actually specifying here the function. You'll see where we do that in just a minute. That's going to be in our Sam project. But for now, we can just leave these settings. But I do need to change a couple of things to do with this. The first thing I need to change with this is I'm going to also go under output. I'm going to deselect the option that says to filter the output. And then I'm going to also go here under error handling and I'm going to remove that retryer. This is the exact same thing that I did on the first Lambda function. And now that I've done that, what I'm going to do next, I'm going to drag out another flow step, and this one is going to be called choice. So in other words here, we're going in and adding in kind of an if-else kind of step, right? And so we can define some given conditions that will enable us to do something different depending on the data that gets passed into it. So this is pretty powerful. So what we're going to do here, I need to give this one a name also. So instead of just choice, we'll actually call this one is text detection completed. Because as I mentioned, we need to be able to account for situations where it's done in 30 seconds or where it's not done. So I'm going to go ahead and implement some logic to do just that. So what I need to do here is I need to go ahead and go here to the default rule. And I'm going to change it to say, you know what? I want you to actually go back to the wait step. So you can see here that we're actually going back here to a previous step. That's going to be the default. Now, I also need to go through and add something that's not the default, that actually what we would do if it is completed. So what we'll do first is I'm going to actually drag out another Lambda function, and we're going to call this one. I need to go ahead and give this one a name also. We're going to call this one insert document. This is going to be our final step, and that's what we'll do when we're inserting something into the database. Okay, so we have all of our steps there, but I need to go through and configure some of the logic. So now that I've drug that out, what I need to do next is I'm going to go back here and I'm going to change rule 1. Now here within rule 1, what I'm going to do is I'm going to specify 2 different conditions. So the first condition I'm going to say is if this value called job status is present, and then I'm going to change this to be an and, so it's going to evaluate 2 different conditions, that same value is going to be equal to a string, and in this case, we're going to give it the string of succeeded. So this is going to be the output of the API. If it's done, it's going to say, hey, I've succeeded. So with that being said, we're going to actually say, if we look for that, then we know that we're ready to actually move on. So once I say yes, you'll see here that we now have our choice that will either go through and evaluate that. If it receives that it is completed, it'll go ahead and move to the next Lambda function. But if not, it'll go back to the wait step and wait another 30 seconds. So that gets us through. We're almost done. We're getting pretty close here to this. I need to go to this last function here, which is going to be the function where we insert it into the database. I need to go through and do the same thing I've done on the others, change filter output and change error handling. We're going to remove our retryer here. And now here's the cool thing. I mentioned to you that this helps in creating those that definition. So in helping with that definition, what this enables us to do is we can now go in and take a look at the generated JSON from what we've just created in our browser. So let's take a look at that. So here, if I go in and click on the definition option, you're going to see that we get the very JSON that we need to define our step function. So I'm going to go ahead here. I'm going to click on copy. We've actually now copied that, and I'm going to go back over to VS Code. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to go in and create a new file. So in this case, we're going to call this, we're going to say document processing .asl.json. Okay, so now we can go in and paste in this JSON. Now, there are a couple things that we need to do here. As I mentioned, we're not referencing any specific functions yet. So I'm going to go here and replace this with a variable, and we'll actually fill this variable in using Sam in just a minute. The next thing I'm going to go down here is when we actually get to the next one, which is get text detection results. I'm going to go in and do the same thing here. And the next thing I'm going to do is scroll all the way to the bottom for our last step, which is a Lambda function, and I'm going to put in this variable here. So I've added those 3 things in, and the only other thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to remove this section called parameters. As I mentioned earlier, I'm trying just to keep this pretty simple. And so I'm going to remove this, and basically what this is going to do is just make sure that whatever we pass out of the previous step is going to get passed into the next step just as it was. So this goes through the process of defining that. And I hope you can see that that visual tool can enable you to go in and define some fairly complex workflows without having to know every bit of that ASL or Amazon States language right from the beginning. And we can use this within our SAM projects. And I want to show you how next. So here, I'm going to go in and I'm going to select the template.yaml file. Now, what we need to do in here is we need to define our functions. So as I mentioned, it makes it quite a bit easier to work with within SAM to create these individual Lambda functions, because otherwise we're having to go in and define a lot of specific things within CloudFormation. So we're going to go ahead and show you how that works here. Now, I'm going to go ahead and define the first function. Now, again, we haven't actually written the code for these yet. We'll do that in just a minute, but I'm going to go ahead and define this one here, and this one's called get document metadata function. And you can see here that it references this code URI. So this is the directory it knows to look for it in, and we'll define that in just a minute. Now, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to define another one, and this one is going to be called get text detection results. And then we're going to do one more, and this one is going to be the insert document function. So these are our 3 Lambda functions that we need. And I want to call out something here because I want you to get what this is doing for us. SAM handles a lot of things, especially for runtimes that it's familiar with. So it knows, in my case, because I'm dealing with Node.js, it knows that it needs to be able to package up my node modules and my package.json file using and utilize my package lock file. And then it knows that I have a JavaScript file that's defined for this function. It needs to package that up as well. And it needs to create a zip file for each of these and then upload those as a part of creating the Lambda function. Those are things that before something like the serverless framework or SAM, we would have to do manually when Lambda first came out. So these are the kinds of things that are built into SAM. But what you'll see in a minute when we actually work on editing these, like after we deploy them and we go through and update them, you'll see that the SAM accelerate capabilities kind of takes this even to the next level, because it can basically update almost instantly our Lambda functions in the cloud when we're working within a development environment. So let me go back in here to the code. The next thing we're going to do is we need to go in and define our state machine. So I'm going to go ahead and go to that. And here we're going to first reference that document processing ASL.json file that I just mentioned. And you can see here that we're substituting these values. So these are the variables that we put into that JSON file. And then I'm actually referencing those and I'm getting a value called the ARN, or basically the resource identifier for AWS. That ARN, I'm going to get that from each of the functions that I've just created. So it's going to substitute that value in for each of those. Now, the next thing I'm going to do is I need to define some other things as well. I need to define what we would call some policies for what this step function can do. In this case, it needs to have permission to do several things. First of all, to basically execute any of those Lambda functions. It also needs to be able to get access to that bucket where we're uploading those PDF files. And it needs to be able to work with the Textract service that we're including within our given step function. So those are the policies. And the last thing is, if you remember, I said I wanted this to actually kick off with us uploading something to an S3 bucket. So we can create an event configuration here that says, hey, anytime somebody creates a new object inside of the bucket that we've created, we're going to use a service called Event Bridge to start our step function. So this is going to kick off the whole process for us. So now that we have that in place, we're ready to go in and actually define these given functions. And I'm going to try to do this fairly quickly. So I'm going to go ahead and go here under functions. We're going to delete the 3 different directories that are currently in there that came with the template that was provided by AWS. We're not going to use those. I'm going to create a new folder. I'm going to create one called document metadata. I'm going to go in and create another one. And this one is going to be called detection results. And I'm going to go in and create another one. And this one is going to be called insert document. Now, I need to go through and add some things to each of these. So I want to go ahead and go to document metadata. That's actually the first step in the process for us. And I'm going to go in and create a new file. And this one is going to be package.json. Now, again, if you're not a Node.js developer, this is basically just where we define some information about this given service. And in this case, we're defining some dependencies. So perfect. I can do that there. I'm also going to go in here. I'm going to go ahead and create another file in this directory. And this one is going to be called index.js. This is just going to be my JavaScript file. And basically all we're doing here is we're using a library called PDFlib, and that's going to enable us to analyze a PDF file and pull out some metadata. Now, to do that, we're actually downloading the file locally. And when I say locally, I mean in terms of the Lambda service. We'll download it, analyze it, and then we'll get that data and we'll pass it on. And you'll see this in action in just a minute. Okay. So now that I have that in place, I need to go through and do the same thing for the detection results service. So I'm going to go here. I'm going to say that we want to create a new file. This one is going to be called package.json. And I need to go in here and do the same thing. And we're going to go in and also create another file, which is going to be index.js. And just as before, we're going to go in and create a JavaScript service that we're going to use for this. And this is going to analyze all that data that comes back from Textract. And then I'm going to go do the same thing on our last service. We're going to create a new file called package.json. We're going to create that. We'll save that. I'm going to go through here and then create a index.js file. And then I'm going to go in and paste this in. Now, one of the things I want you to notice here, we actually have a to-do in here. Something actually is not done because I wanted to showcase the ability to utilize the SAM Accelerate features. And so we'll be doing that here in just a minute. Okay, so I've defined each of the services that we're going to be working with. And now we're pretty much ready to really put all of this into use. So I'm going to go back here to the terminal. And here within the terminal, we're going to execute a command called sam deploy guided. So I'm going to go ahead and execute this. Oops, hold on one second. Okay, give me 1 second. I need to fix one thing here. Okay. Going to go back here to this. Okay, let's see if it likes that a little bit better. This is what I get for utilizing the system I do for trying to have to type in front of all of you guys. So let's try this to run this one more time. Perfect. Now, we need to give this a name. Now, we're already going to use CBL workflow. That's what we'll use here for the name. And we're going to specify a region. I'm going to say US East 2, as I mentioned. That's what we're using. And we're going to say why that we actually want to do this. And we know that it's going to need to create a role for this to be able to work. We say it's fine to do that. And I'm going to select the option here to disable rollback. And we're going to actually set it to actually save these values to a configuration file. And we can just accept the default value. And we'll also use the default configuration environment. So it's going to go through the process now of going through some steps to get ready to deploy. Now, we're just doing here a normal deploy. And you can see here that it's going to say, hey, there's all these things we're going to have to create. Do you want us to do it? We're going to say, yes, absolutely. Let's go through and create this. And it's going to start the process. Now, if you remember from what I said earlier, this is utilizing CloudFormation, which is the AWS service for infrastructure as code to truly perform this deployment. We're using SAM to make the definition easier. But what SAM does is it creates CloudFormation templates based on what we create for our template. So it's going through the process now of creating this. It'll take just a little bit to go through this process. But what I want to talk about next, just really briefly, is helping you understand how we're going to be optimizing the experience of how we work within SAM Accelerate. So I've purposefully put a couple of things that are going to have to be fixed inside of the workflow that we've just created. So this will help us see how we can use these SAM Accelerate features to really kind of utilize the next generation of the serverless development experience where we're working entirely in the cloud, but we're doing so much faster than what we used to do. Because I'll be honest with you, if we're just relying on CloudFormation to do our deployments for our development environments, it's going to be slower than we need it to be. But here's where I really need to mention one caveat that is super critical for you to understand. And that's this, that really SAM Accelerate is just for your development environments. If you're doing a production deployment, you still need to follow a full CloudFormation deployment because there's a lot of steps that happen in that process that need to happen. But when we're talking about just development environment and you want quick, fast feedback, this is where SAM Accelerate makes things a lot easier for you. So we're still deploying here. I can pull this up so you can take a look at that really quick. You can see it's still going through the process of creating these individual resources, and we're getting close to the point where we're about to be done. And if I were to go over, just so you understand kind of the link here, if I were to go back over to the browser, if I were to pull that up, let me go ahead and close this out. If I were to pull this up, I'm going to go ahead and cancel out of the workflow that we just created because we actually already have that saved. First of all, you can see that we already have a state machine that we've just deployed, so that is already showing up. But if I were to go under CloudFormation, you could go in and see this deployment actually happening. So here I can go under stacks and you can see CBL workflow is currently in progress. And you can see that it is actually creating the resources. We can go through and see all the resources that have been created, the ones that are being created. As I mentioned, this is the infrastructure as code service for AWS. So we've gotten that in place. I'm going to go ahead and we'll wait for this to finish out, which should take just a little bit longer. But I also want to go through and take a look at one of the outputs that we created. So if I click on outputs here, you see that we actually have a document bucket name already populated. So I'm going to go here for S3, not S2, S3. Let me type correctly here. And we're going to go ahead and look to upload a file. So here is our document bucket, and this is where we're going to upload a file. Let me actually make things quite a bit bigger here so everybody can see. We're just going to go in and drop a file in just a minute. I'm actually going to get one ready. Now, this is just a very basic sample PDF file. 1 second here. Okay, Finder's being funny right now on my Mac. Don't worry about it. We'll get to the PDF file in just a minute. But what I want to showcase here is that we're going to upload the file and we're going to go through and see. Now, as I mentioned, we're going to have some failures that we're going to have to fix. And I'm going to show you how we use SAM Accelerate to really improve that overall development workflow. So here we go. Actually, let me go ahead and pull this up. I think this is going to work for me now. Yeah, you can see here the PDF file is just one that has lorem ipsum, so just some fake text included. That's what we'll be using, and we'll see if we can actually get this to work properly with our workflow. So let me go back here to the terminal really quick. We can see here that our deployment has completed. We also can see those two outputs we've configured, so we can see the name of our S3 bucket. We were just looking at it. We also can see the name of our DynamoDB table. So now that I've got those things in place, let's go ahead and go back into the browser. And I'm going to go ahead and upload this file. Oh, Finder is being super fun tonight. That's going to make things fun. Give me 1 second here. That will fix itself. Okay, we can do this a couple of different ways. First of all, this is a good point. I'm going to go ahead and pause here for just a second while it works that out. Let me see, are there any questions for what we've gone through so far? Are there any questions around SAM, the prerequisites that you need to get ready with SAM, step functions, any of those things? Is there anything that people have questions on? If so, go ahead and place those down in the questions really quick. While you're typing that, I was able to get Finder to cooperate here properly. So now what I'm going to do is you'll be able to see here that we can just hit upload, and this will kick off the process for us. So great. So we have that included. Now, what we're going to see here is if we go next to step functions, we're going to actually get an insight into what's going on. And we should see that we're going to have a step function execution that's going to fail here. That's what it was supposed to do. As I've mentioned, we've put some kind of roadblocks in here. We can see that there's already a failure happening within get document metadata. Now, here's the cool thing about working with the console and step functions. You can see a lot of information like step input. This is what you actually gets passed here from Event Bridge telling us, hey, you uploaded a file. Here's the name of the bucket that it came from, and here's the name of the individual file. Now, we also can look at the output. There's not any output here because it failed, but we can see the exception, right? So here, actually, oops, I've included some incorrect information here. And I'll explain why this is a problem here in just a minute. So we're going to have to fix that. And I'm going to show you how we do that utilizing SAM Accelerate. So I'm going to go ahead and pull up my terminal here. And I'm going to go ahead and specify here that we are going to utilize SAM Sync. So let me explain to you what this capability is. SAM Sync gives us the ability to do, in a lot of ways, a quick update for our Lambda functions. So the way this will work is it's going to be able to go in and quickly basically just use an AWS SDK call to quickly update a function without having to do a full CloudFormation deployment. So the way that we do this here within our terminal is I'm just going to go in and I'm going to specify, hey, SAM Sync. So I'm going to pull up this. I'm going to say SAM Sync. I'm going to give it the stack name. We're going to specify the region, and then I'm going to specify the watch command. This is going to enable us to do some quick updates. So, but here's the thing to understand. It's going to first tell us, hey, this needs to be a development environment. But the other thing you need to know is it's not going to be able to do this if we're changing our SAM template, for example, or if we're changing anything that actually changes our infrastructure. But what it will do is, in those cases, it will automatically perform an update for us of our infrastructure. So it knows whether or not it's something it can update quickly or not. So with that being said, give me just 1 second and we're going to get ready to go in and actually work with this here. So I'm going to go ahead and get ready to update our functions. So I'm going to go here under our first one. Let's go ahead and pull up VS Code again, and we're going to go under detection results. So here, I'm going to go ahead and pull this up. Give me just 1 second. Okay, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to basically paste in an update for this. I'm going to hit save, and then as soon as I do, I'm going to bounce back over to the terminal. because what I want you to see, oh, it's actually not finished just yet. So we'll let it finish the initial deployment, and then we'll actually see this update. So I'm going to go ahead and update this one. I'm going to go ahead and go to the next one that needs to be updated, which is under document metadata. I'm going to grab that one. We'll actually paste this in as well. And then I've got a final update for the last of our functions. Let me see if this is done yet. Nope, still deploying, so it's almost there. So I'm going to go ahead and go next under the last one for insert. And we're going to save. Now, I'm also going to tell you that there's one other thing that we need to do for this. And this is and I want to kind of use this to highlight the kinds of things we can use with Sam Accelerate and the kinds of things where it will, even though we're using Sam Accelerate, it will do a full deployment. So here within our template, if we look here at our first function called get document metadata function. Now, what's going on here with this one is that it technically doesn't have a policy to get access to our S3 bucket. So we're going to need to go in and actually add this in. So I'm going to go here and paste in that we need to give it what's called an S3 Crud policy, which gives it the ability to perform basic actions on the objects. But in doing so, we're going to have to perform a full deployment for that to be able to work. So we can see here that it's actually ready to go on the initial SAM deployment, but it's now triggered an actual CloudFormation update. We can see this is a CloudFormation update because here where it says like resource status, this is actually giving us a full update from CloudFormation. Now, that is because we updated our template file. But in this case, if we simply need to do some updates inside of our Lambda functions, this is where we could get those fast updates. So now that we've actually put some updates into place, I'm going to do one other thing because I want to show you another way that we can utilize the features of Sam Accelerate, and these actually are pretty powerful. So I'm going to go here under another tab here in my terminal, and I'm going to type in this command, sam logs, and then I'm going to pass in the stack name. I'm going to tell it to include traces, and I'm going to give it the region, and I'm going to say I want it to tail. Now, this is another way that it really shortcuts the overall development experience because here you don't have to go into the console to get the logs for what you're doing. So I'm going to go ahead and hit enter on this, and you're going to see a bunch of data that streams out here. First of all, you'll see here that we see the same error that we saw before that we needed to fix and that we've actually now deployed a change for. So now when we actually rerun our workflow in just a minute, we should be able to see the logs for each of those files as it's performing those steps in our step function, see the outputs of the logs here. So let me go ahead and bounce back over to the browser. First of all, we'll check on our deployments over here. Everything's done, everything's completed. I want to show you a quick update really quick. So I'm just going to say if we were to go here under our first one, which is get document metadata, let's say that I'm just going to add in a little update at the end of this logging statement and then hit save and then bounce back over. We'll see here that it's already started the process for updating. And here, just within a matter of seconds, it's done. So that's how quick we can perform updates when we're using Sam Accelerate. Now, let's go back and let's really take a look at seeing all of this stuff working together. So I'm going to go back here under our step function. I'm going to say here, I just want to create a new execution. So it's going to take the same data, so the same file that we passed in, it's going to take all of that and then just start another instance of our step function, another execution. So here we can see that it started off with our get document metadata function. As I mentioned, we can go in and see the input of that. We can see the data that's going into it. It's now green. We can take a look at the output data, right? And when you can see here the output data here, it gives us the different metadata that it pulled out of this. We can also see that it started the process of working with Textract to get our text detection. So it's now in that wait step. As I mentioned earlier, this is going to be waiting 30 seconds and then going back and checking to see if that process has completed. So we'll give this just a second here to finish up. And then we can see that it basically all the rest of the process has completed. So you can see, for example, if we look at the get text detection results, if we look at the output, here is all of that fake text that we included, all the lorem ipsum is being returned as well. And then the final step, it inserted this into the document. So if I were to go up here and actually go in and say, let's go to DynamoDB, and I'm going to open this up in a new tab. And if we went in and took a look at this, let's go to tables. There's the table that was created by Sam, and we say explore table items. We can see here, if we go in, we do have one item, and this is the item from our document. It includes the detected text. It also includes all the different metadata that's been configured. I hope as you hear this, you're excited about the possibilities, first of all, of utilizing these great functions on AWS, using step functions, using Lambda, using S3, even using Textract. These are very powerful services, but I also hope that you're excited by the fact that you can utilize a much more efficient workflow for working entirely in the cloud for your development environment with SAM Accelerate. There's a couple things I want to point out to you here. So let me just point a few of these things out really quickly. So first of all, I want to point out that you can actually get access to the GitHub repository. We've posted it earlier. You also can follow this link and get to the GitHub repository. You can then go back and watch along with the video and do all of these steps yourself. Okay? The next thing I want to point out is that if you're really interested in learning more about building out these kinds of workflows, I also have a complete serverless learning path on Pluralsight where I actually build out this entire concept of document processing utilizing AWS services. And in that case, I do that using another way to define infrastructure called the CDK, but I walk through using about 20 different AWS services over 11 courses. So this can help you really focus in if you want to learn more about the different capabilities of building serverless applications. So I know we have covered a huge amount here in this episode, but I would be remiss if I didn't ask if there are any questions that you want me to dive into before we wrap up. And I also want to say we're also very interested in hearing what topics you would like us to cover next on Cloud Builder Live. And again, we take time to talk through AWS, Azure, and GCP. So if there's topics on any of those platforms that you're interested in, we would love to hear that from you. So again, we just want to be sure that we're providing the kinds of resources that you want that will help you truly become better builders in the cloud. So let me just take a minute here and see if I see any questions that are going to be coming in. I'm going to take a breath because I think I've talked way too much over the course of this episode. Okay, I don't see any initial questions coming through right now. So I just want to say, first of all, thank you. I know this is valuable time that you have. And so I want to thank you for joining me for Cloud Builder Live. I hope you have found this valuable. You can engage with us on the Pluralsight Discord if you want to actually connect with me, if you want to go through and talk about some questions that you have based on what we've covered. You also can follow me on Twitter at _DavidTucker_ if you want to be able to interact with me there. But I absolutely hope you come back next month in August to join us for the next episode of Cloud Builder Live. Thanks, everybody.